1,020 meters. In the middle of a war-torn city, under heavy rain and drifting smoke, a sniper steadied his breathing and waited. Across the ruins in Marawi, a group of militants moved through the shattered streets, unaware that someone nearly a kilometer away was watching their every step. For weeks, commanders have been waiting for a moment like this. One clear shot, one chance, one bullet that could shift the balance of an entire battle. And when that moment finally came, the outcome of Marawi's siege would never be the same again. Main documentary script. The southern Philippine island of Mindanao is known for its natural beauty. Green mountains stretch for miles across the horizon, and rivers carve their way through dense forests and quiet towns. But beneath this peaceful landscape lies a long history of conflict. For decades, parts of Mindanao have experienced tension between government forces and armed groups seeking control, influence, or independence. Many of these conflicts remain local, but in the years leading up to 2017, something began to change. Extremist networks inspired by the Islamic State began expanding into Southeast Asia, and in the Philippines, a small but determined group of militants saw an opportunity. The group was led by two brothers, Omar and Abdullah Mayute. Unlike many militant leaders, the Mayute brothers were educated and came from a well-known family in Lanao del Sur. But during trips abroad, they developed connections with extremist networks that were rapidly spreading across the region. When they returned home, they brought back a dangerous vision. They wanted to establish an ISIS-aligned stronghold in the Philippines, and they believed the city of Marawi could become its center. To achieve this goal, the Mayute group formed alliances with other militant organizations operating in the southern Philippines. Among them was the Abu Sayyaf group, which had already built a reputation for kidnappings and violent attacks. But the most important ally was a man named Ismail Hapilon. Hapilon had spent decades involved in militant activity. In 2016, the Islamic State formally recognized him as its leader in Southeast Asia. That recognition changed everything. For the first time, militants in the Philippines believed they had international backing, and they began preparing for something far larger than isolated attacks. They began preparing to take a city. On May 23, 2017, that plan was set into motion. Philippine government forces launched an operation to capture Ismail Hapilon inside Marawi, but the militants were ready. Within hours, hundreds of fighters spread across the city. Government buildings were seized, major roads were blocked, and armed militants appeared across rooftops and alleyways. Before the day ended, the black flag associated with ISIS had been raised above parts of the city. For the first time in Southeast Asia, an ISIS-aligned group had captured and held a major urban area. The city of Marawi, once home to more than 200,000 people, suddenly became a battlefield. The militants had prepared carefully. Weapons had been smuggled into the city weeks before the attack. Ammunition stockpiles were hidden inside houses and buildings. Some militants even dug tunnels beneath the streets so they could move between positions without being seen. They turned homes into firing positions. Windows were reinforced with sandbags. Rooms were converted into supply points. The entire city had been transformed into a defensive fortress. When government forces began pushing into the city, they faced one of the most difficult forms of combat, urban warfare. Every building could hide fighters. Every street corner could be an ambush. And high above the streets, militant snipers watched the advancing troops. For soldiers entering the city, danger could come from any direction. The battle quickly became slow and dangerous. Entire blocks had to be cleared building by building, sometimes room by room. But as the weeks passed, the Philippine military began adapting its strategy. Large troop movements were no longer the only solution. Instead, commanders relied on smaller specialized units. Among the most important of these units were sniper teams. A sniper team usually consists of two soldiers, the shooter and the spotter. The sniper controls a rifle and takes the shot. The spotter studies the battlefield through powerful optics. They measure distance, calculate wind, and help guide the shooter to the target. In urban warfare, sniper teams can change the course of battle without ever being seen. During the siege of Marawi, several sniper teams were positioned around the outskirts of the city. Their mission was clear: observe enemy movement, identify key targets, and eliminate threats that slowed the military advance. One particular team had taken position inside a damaged concrete building overlooking part of the city center. The building had been heavily damaged during earlier fighting. Cracks ran across the walls. Parts of the roof had collapsed. Rainwater dripped through broken concrete. But the position offered one critical advantage: height. From this elevated location, the sniper team could see nearly a kilometer across the ruined city. Collapsed buildings stretched across the horizon. Burned vehicles lined the streets. Smoke drifted slowly between shattered rooftops. For days, the team watched the same streets through their optics. Morning after morning, night after night. Most of the time, nothing moved. Only wind pushing debris across the road, or smoke rising from distant fires. But patience is part of a sniper's job, and eventually, patience pays off. One evening, just before sunset, the spotter noticed movement near a damaged building. A group of militants stepped cautiously into the street. They moved carefully, scanning the area. Something about the group stood out. The fighters seemed to be protecting someone. The spotter focused his optics and looked closer. One man stood slightly apart from the others. He spoke briefly while the others listened. It was a small detail, but experienced observers know that leadership often reveals itself in subtle ways. The spotter quietly reported the observation. The sniper adjusted his rifle. The rangefinder displayed the distance, just over 1,000 meters. A shot at that range is never easy, even in perfect conditions. But Marawi was far from perfect. Smoke drifted through the air. Wind moved unpredictably between buildings, and the light was fading quickly. The sniper slowed his breathing. Through the scope, the distant figures came into focus. The crosshairs shifted slightly as the shooter adjusted for wind. The spotter confirmed the calculations. Distance, wind correction, target movement. Everything had to be perfect. The sniper took one final breath, then held it. The trigger moved slowly beneath his finger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the empty buildings. At that distance, the bullet would take more than a second to reach its target. Through the scope, the sniper watched the distant street. For a brief moment, nothing changed. Then one of the figures suddenly collapsed beside a burned vehicle. The others reacted instantly. They scrambled for cover behind rubble and shattered walls. But the moment had already passed. The shot had landed. The sniper slowly lowered his rifle. The spotter continued watching through the optic. Moments later, reports from nearby units began to change. Militant movement in the area became disorganized. Communication between several militant positions suddenly stopped. Within hours, government forces advancing through nearby sectors encountered far less resistance. In war, a single action rarely ends the battle, but sometimes one precise moment shifts the momentum. The siege of Marawi would continue for months, but gradually, government forces pushed the militants back, building by building, street by street. After 154 days of fighting, the battle finally came to an end. Large sections of the city had been destroyed. Thousands of civilians were displaced, and reconstruction would take years. But the siege also revealed an important truth about modern warfare. Victory is not always decided by the largest forces. Sometimes it comes from small teams operating quietly in the background, watching, waiting, and when the moment arrives, taking a single shot that changes everything.
The city will rise again. Keep pushing, brothers.
Neighborhoods where families had lived for generations. This is the civilian cost.
They woke to the sound of gunfire and had minutes to decide.
Children who had never known war learned to identify incoming and outgoing fire by its sound.